Our next guest he's been tracking legislative issues in Idaho now for 4 decades or more. And he says that one of the big ones that's going to be coming up in this next legislative session is going to be dealing with funding for mental health treatment in the state of Idaho. And he says it's one of those issues that maybe pay me now or pay me later, probably similar in some respects to the transportation issues we've dealt with in recent years, where money was allocated, but it wasn't nearly enough from what projections were that we needed for repairs. I should point out Randy Staples is the publisher of Idaho Weekly Briefing, and you may have already read his column on this subject as well because it's printed across many newspapers throughout the region. And Randy, first of all, welcome back to KLIX.
Good to be here.
It's 8:43. Bill Colley with you as well on Top Story. We have 33 and light snow showers still throughout the area, depending, spotty, I guess we could say at this point. I read the column, and the first thing I thought is that this is no different in some respects than any other year where there's going to be a limited potential to spend money, but a great many needs that people feel need that aren't being addressed. And so there's going to be a bit of a, I would think, a bit of a fight over that particular issue on funding for mental health treatment.
Well, there's obviously to some extent or another a limited amount of money. It obviously doesn't expand forever, and yeah, there's always fights about how to apportion it. You mentioned roads a minute ago, and that I think that's a good analogy for it, and the same thing is true with roads. If you talk to somebody who's a road engineer or somebody involved with budgeting for it, they will tell you that if you catch a road when it is still just in the early wear stages and do some light repairs to it at that stage, the costs are not very high. It's really pretty modest. But if you let it go, if you start letting the potholes accumulate and letting sections of road deteriorate too badly, the cost doesn't just increase a little bit, it multiplies. It gets vastly more expensive to repair. It's almost like building a brand new road from scratch. And the same sort of thing is true, I think, on some of the mental health fronts. That if you talk to local police officer for that matter, not even necessarily a police chief, you will probably find that they spend a good chunk of time dealing with people more so than you would expect, dealing with people who have mental health or drug or alcohol issues. And I've seen this sort of thing happen not far from where I live. That enormous amounts of time, at first with the police, and then with whole strings of other people trying to get the problem resolved. Getting in this case, in a lot of cases, neighborhood problems resolved is becomes a really very big deal. And if somehow some years ago somebody had aggressively dealt with the problem and made it taken a serious crack at solving it rather than just providing a revolving door, it might have saved a whole lot of effort down the line.
I, I referenced this briefly in passing last week, but Representative Ron Nate had a column in the Rexburg paper a couple of weeks ago where he mentioned the day is going to come where a lot of the federal money that the state receives, which is a huge part of its budget, that's going to dry up because the federal government simply is going to have a day of reckoning when it comes to spending, and that a lot of the things that we have, we're not going to be able to either afford, or we're going to have to start making some decisions, a triage, if you will. And I remember going to these community development block grant meetings years ago when I was a young reporter, and all of these people would come in and they would say, "We need this money, or 1,000 people are going to die," and somebody else would step up and say, "Well, if my group doesn't get it, 10,000 people are going to die." I'm exaggerating a bit, but there's this fight that's going to go on, and I realize that everybody out there feels they're fighting a good cause, but there's so many, and there's going to be so few resources. Are we headed for some sort of crack up?
Well, I don't think necessarily. I mean, as far as what happens with the federal government down the road, really, who knows? We There were a lot of people who were telling us a decade ago that the debt that we were piling on at that point was unsustainable, and that we were within a very short period of time of seeing it crack up, and we were seeing all sorts of really Chicken Little stories going on at that time. And it's who knows. It's there's we really we really haven't suffered anything like that up to this point, and B, over the last few years, the deficit, the annual amount that we're going into debt has been cut by more than 2/3. So we're right now, although this could be reversed, we're right now on the verge of starting to run surpluses and thereby cut down the debt. We'll see what happens, with the new administration, but that's the track that we're on right now. But we'll see. We'll see what happens there. But I'm not sure that we can really plan with the idea of catastrophe in mind, and that if you once again, if you don't do this, uh, you're going to wind up with larger problems down the road, and the problems are going to be there whether the fix is funded or not. If our roads collapse, or if we have neighborhoods that just turn into disaster areas, I mean that being kind of the through line projection of these sorts of things, that's not going to be exactly very beneficial for us either.
It's 8:49. Our guest is Randy Staples from Idaho Weekly Briefing. It's 33. Bill Colley with you as well on Top Story on News Radio 1310, KLIX and News Radio 1310.com. But Randy, for people who are listening this morning, if they'd like to take a look at the briefing, where would you send them?
I would send them to www.ridenbaugh.com. That's RIDENBAUGH.
And then I think I had just finished reading the briefing and your story about the recommendations about cutting down juniper trees to protect sage grouse habitat. And I think I pulled up a headline too as well. I think it was the lead headline at the Press Tribune this morning in Nampa as well. And everywhere I'm turning, I'm seeing stories about this in the last several days. But I was telling you off air, a lot of people I'm getting reaction from are not happy about the notion that someone's going to be cutting down their trees.
That's of course, juniper trees are not exactly forest type trees. They're a little different kind of critter, but yeah, I can imagine that there's going to be some reaction there, and people are going to have some real variance of opinions on this, and that's fine. I would say that when you do something in a large scale like this may be, although apparently what they're looking at is just cuts in a relatively small area, at least for the moment. But but we'll see. It's kind of a test thing, and who knows what the conclusion might be. I would say to people, absolutely weigh in. Let the BLM know what you think about it. Let them know what you think about it and why. Because there could be very often when you do something like this, there's not just one effect. They're looking at the sage grouse, but who knows what other effects there may be. And you were just pointing out what a few of them could be.
And I think that you could probably, if you took down 50 acres and used a test site, 50 acres, then you could observe what happens following that. That might be a good place to start versus, let's say, coming in and knocking trees down left and right.
I think that's where they're at least looking at starting. Of course, sometimes once you get started on this kind of thing, there's kind of a momentum that builds up, and you keep on going, and don't necessarily stop and slow down the way you should. I would say that people who are concerned about it, and certainly anybody that lives in the Twin Falls area, is not far from serious juniper country. Um, take a close look at it, monitor it closely, and contact the BLM and let them know what you think.
A lot of this could change, I'm sure, January 20th, because we might see a tremendous philosophy difference once we have a new administration in Washington. And a lot of these agencies could also see a change in their approaches as well.
There could be. We don't really know what the changes may be. You're right. There could be major changes, but we don't really know for certain where that will be. And I guess I'm trying to kind of withhold my opinion much until then. I see from my standpoint in commenting on some of this, uh, I see kind of a gap period here. Before the election, I think everybody needs to say what they think and say what they know about what may be coming. Uh, and once it starts, then I think we need to weigh in uh, with our opinions as well. In between, it's really a lot of it's really kind of speculation, and we don't really know for certain a lot about what exactly will happen and what exactly it will look like. So I don't know whether that's really giving benefit of the doubt, but it's just kind of recognizing that the new administration hasn't happened yet, and it will that will happen in late January. So we'll see what happens then.
They don't have enough saws to get them all down between now and then.
It'll be yeah, it'll be an interesting time though to watch and see how it develops on the front end.
Randy, I think we have a caller who'd like to chime in on this subject, if you don't mind. Uh,
Hmm.
Caller, you're on the air with Randy Staples this morning on KLIX. I assume your comment or question is about the juniper trees. Go ahead.
Yeah, this whole burning thing's about water. And I'll tell you why. They burned off most of our forests. A lot of it's been burned twice. Releases the water down the watersheds into the Columbia River, where the biggest pipeline in U.S. history is proposed to pump water out of the Columbia into Northern California and the big cities in California. Now, the same thing's going on. You look at the burns in the hills down there and all the trees that have been burned. Guess what? Vegas is almost out of water. There's no water between Twin Falls and Vegas. It's been drilled. The only thing they found is oil
I'll tell you what. Let's
between.
let Randy handle that one. Randy, what do you think about there's some truth to the theory there?
Well, there's the idea of piping water down to the Southwest has been around a very long time.
Sure.
There's no start to it. There's no nobody's even got something seriously on the drawing board at this point. But there are people in the Southwest that in California, Nevada, places like that, who do bring it up from time to time, and it's something that people in the Northwest have to keep their eye on. I think that's certainly true.
Got about 2 minutes to go. You also wrote in the briefing this week that Democrats are seeing a surge of interest and activity from people in their local areas throughout Idaho, and some of that may be related just to that. Well, they're not happy with the election results. One wonders if that will translate into long-term activity, or if it'll just be something that fades over a matter of weeks to months.
Well, I guess that's what we'll find out. Of course, in some ways, it's always more fun to be in the opposition because you're not in a position of having to take responsibility for what's going on. It's not on them, and they can critique. That's they're in the very much the position that Republicans were in 8 years ago. So, well, we'll see how determined they are. The Republicans were pretty determined.
I think that a lot of what we've seen in the streets that wouldn't necessarily happen in places like Idaho to a great extent, but that sort of almost anger. They're trying to figure out ways to challenge that into a activity that's a little bit more lawful, I would imagine.
That or more productive that actually does make for some kind of change or makes for some kind of pressure on Washington and in other states in other places as well. As you say, in Idaho, it's not so much of a factor, but in some states it certainly is.
And I would assume that a lot of people who didn't take an interest in politics after the results, they were unhappy with the results and suddenly have realized that maybe they should be taking an interest.
Well, certainly everybody certainly should. It's uh, this is this is certainly a point when our close attention is absolutely called for. Well, it always is. We always need to pay close attention. We should never just let it go. I'd say this is notably such an occasion.
One of my former coworkers used to say, "You may not have an interest in politics, but politics is interested in you."
Very true. Very true.
Well, Randy, quickly before we wrap up, the web address again.
It is www.ridenbaugh.com. RIDENBAUGH.
Look forward to speaking again next Monday.
Okay, talk to you then.
Randy Staples joining us today from Idaho Weekly Briefing, as he does on Monday mornings between 8:40 and 9 o'clock. One more hour of the program coming up. I tell you what, this whole notion of chopping down the juniper trees is going to be a story that's unfolding over the next several weeks around here, and it might be worth having some more folks on the air to talk about that too, as well in the coming days. If you have anyone you can suggest that would be a good guest on this issue, because we're going to have to be informed, please drop me an email at bill.colley, that's Colley, bill.colley at townsquaremedia.com. We've got one more hour of the program just ahead, but news is next from Fox at 9 o'clock.